Worse, yeah, better, yes, good. All right, so we'll give you a quick introduction to who I am. You probably don't care, but as far as where I come from and the reason this presentation is what it is. I'm Josh Brunty. I'm a professor of digital forensics, information assurance at Marsh University, which is based in Huntington, West Virginia, which is right on the border of West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio, kind of right there in that tri-state region. The kind of stuff that I teach, I'm kind of the practitioner, the odd guy that came in that really wasn't the lifetime academic, which was, I work out in the field like real people and then go to work. So I kind of get ostracized a little bit by the upper elite faculty as far as that's concerned. But I teach network forensics, mobile device forensics, get into data recovery, which is becoming more and more, I was having a conversation earlier, it's getting harder and harder to do, especially with SSD and NAND media. A little bit, back in the old days, pull the drive out of the machine, image the drive, do that, move forward. And also teach an intro to Linux class. So our program's a little bit different because, we throw an information assurance perspective into it, so makes it, try to make the students more well-rounded when they come out of it. Now my background's a little odd because I come from a law enforcement perspective. So back in West Virginia, I was the lab tech leader of the state lab there and was an examiner there for about 7 years. Worked a whole hodgepodge of cases back there from child exploitation, child porn, in network exploitation. So I saw it all, pretty much, and got to bring that over into academia. So a lot of the stuff that I do now is not really what I did when I was working, but I use a lot of the stuff that I learned when I was working to help the people out now. So Twitter and yeah, I'll only put my Twitter contact on there. So if you want to ping me on Twitter anytime, you can follow our program, follow me on there. So I want to do a couple of things to consider before we begin. So understand, I saw this in the raise of hands this morning, that a lot of you guys, this is your first B-Sides. And we automatically assume when you come into a conference like this that you just know everything and that you've just been doing this for so long. And sometimes I forget because I work with college students that they don't know everything. So what I want to do is I want to set a foundation real quick, and then we'll move into the more advanced stuff. So I want to kind of appeal to all audiences, basically. So let's just think of it in terms of an attacker. What are they looking for? And what are they going to do to pop you? Okay, one of the things you want to do as an attacker is you want to introduce as few moving parts as possible. That's the end game. If I can introduce the least amount of parts in any particular hack or any type of, O-Day or whatever, I don't want it to be big. I want it to be fairly small. That's pretty simplistic. Now, really, we still use software. We really do. I mean, if you look at the basic foundations of it, everything that you introduced as part of your exploit kit, we'll call it just an EK here, increases the likelihood of detection. Okay? Pretty simple and straightforward as well. That said, the attackers will pack the payloads in underlying locations and they'll leverage those native tools for execution. Duh, right? These attack vectors utilize packages that exploit portable execution installs. Now I'm going to use a lot of terms as far as PE installs throughout the duration of this presentation. But they also will pepper in some what we call native tools as well. If you use that methodology right there, you're going to come to that end game to say that this is going to be very, very noisy. We saw that, okay? You probably have heard that term WannaCry all week. If you look at what WannaCry was all about, it's very, very noisy and very, very sloppy. I mean, they were, utilizing, Bitcoin mechanisms, blockchains. They really couldn't even keep track of what Bitcoin transactions were coming in, and they were doing it by hand. This particular scenario here is going to be very, very noisy. Now, if a more advanced hacker knows that that particular system is going to be very, very noisy, you're going to want to move away from that. So I'm thinking, okay, what are they doing now? So I'm all about, let's get into the mindset of the offender, right? Let's get into who is attacking us and how they're going to do it. So I'm going to set another foundation here, and you've probably heard of these before, but you probably haven't heard them in this term before. The portable executable files. Now, PEs, you see them all the time. Come across as object code, DLL files, the font files, executable files that the operating system shares, right? You'll find those 32 and 64-bit installs, or mainly Windows. Now, in the Windows OSs, what you're going to find is those PEs encapsulate the information that is necessary for that Windows OS to wrap that executable code. Now, you're going to see a number of different ways that Windows uses that, and that's probably a whole day's worth of training all in itself, just talking about Windows PE files. I'm going to leave it at there. Now, what's a native tool? Now, whenever I throw out the term native tool, basically what the native tool refers to in this case is those utilities like PowerShell, things that are built in to Windows OS server installs. So you're going to find them, you're going to see them, and you know that they're going to be there upon install. It's kind of like, you know, in Linux you're going to find something like TCP dump, right? You know, just those are things that you're automatically going to see in the operating system. We know those two things are there. As an attacker, the attacker can almost sure bet that you're going to find those two things on every operating system. No matter how many times you patch it, no matter how many patches it goes through, no matter how many iterations of patches it goes through, those two things are going to be there. Now, whether they're still vulnerable is a question beyond of itself. So now I want to move forward and talk about in an ideal attack scenario. Let's think about this, break this down. That the minimum number of easily detectable PE installs coupled with those native tools like PowerShell, you're going to have a quiet install because you're not going to have an install at all. Think about that. No install at all, plus a lower detection rate if there is a detection rate, and you're going to increase the likelihood of a successful attack. And you're like, nah, that'll never happen to my network, won't happen at all. I'll go home, let my firewall take care of it, let my blinking light box do it. Vendor said it was going to do it, right? Wrong. So, how are they doing this? That's the question. You know, sometimes we get so deep in the weeds. I see one of two things happen. Either I get a presentation, or I'll go to a conference and I'll get a vendor level presentation, and I'm not representing any vendor level here. I'll just go ahead and throw out that I'm from a university, paying to come here, share this knowledge with you guys. It's either a vendor level presentation that says, our product does this, 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 and this, buy it. Or you get it on the other end where we talk about this, but we don't talk about how it's done. You see that a lot of the time. It's either one end or the extreme other. Now, how are attackers doing this? That's a question. Believe it or not, this is something, I'll give the backstory of this, is some of these new vectors that I'm finding, that I'm seeing, actually come across in what we call these PUPs, or these potentially unwanted programs. Now, you probably have, and I threw in the term bloatware in there, and you see that in the flyers and the programs going out there. It's really not bloatware anymore. Bloatware is kind of a 90s term, basically, you know, you'll probably see them more termed as potentially unwanted programs. Now, what is a PUP? PUP is basically software that perceives itself as unwanted, even if the user installs it themselves. Give a couple examples of this coming up here shortly. And usually what they'll do is they'll bundle the wanted program with the wrapper application, for example, like Java. They may offer to install that unwanted application, and in cases they won't give you any opt-out method. If you've ever installed Java, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Click this box for this toolbar. If you don't click this box, this toolbar won't get installed. But if you leave it clicked and you're going through an install really quickly, if you're setting up your image, you'll never get rid of it. How many of us have been there? I've been there before. I've just kind of raced through an install, and then all of a sudden you're stuck with this toolbar that you can't get rid of. Even after scrubbing and scrubbing and scrubbing, you just can't get rid of it. There is no opt-out method for that. Now, this may come as a plugin, this may come as a toolbar, this may come as a number of different types of mechanisms in which they install. And I'll cover one of those particular exploitation methods here shortly. This is the scary part about this. In 2014, this is directly from Google. This is not a, when I say Google, I didn't Google that, and this is the first hit that I got. This was a study done by Google, not a Googled study, okay? Let me just throw that out there. 24%, that's close to a quarter of all the malware infections that are out there accounted based upon PUPs. That's a quarter. Yes, sir?
Are they counting the PUPs as malware or just the install vector for malware?
When I looked at that study, that was what they were saying, that the PUP was the vector for the malware. So, yeah, sorry, to kind of clear that up. I hope some way we can share this because I have the link to the actual study that they talk about. So hopefully we can get that in your hands at some point, then you can kind of go through those links and go and look all this stuff back up yourself, basically. So this is not something that you can't easily find. So in most cases, these PUPs aren't inherently malicious the way they are. They really aren't, but it's going to increase your attack surface vector, okay? And that's going to expose those systems to those additional threats. Say this never happens? Well, think again, we'll talk about this. So this is one that, just a prime example, and this is something that popped up on the Androids lately. If you're a Verizon user, one of the things they've done with some of their phones, it was just a limited number of phones, is they added in this new version called AppFlash. I don't know if you've heard of AppFlash, but AppFlash basically put a search feature that was not directly from Google. So, you know, most of you folks are using Android devices, you'll know that the search feature on Android is built in. Well, what Verizon did is said, screw that, we're going to go with our own search feature, and we're going to use that data that we collect from those search features for marketing and using other means. Basically, they're going to take that data and sell it. Why do I say that? Well, EFF came out with a really lengthy article last month that said, hey, this is spyware. Verizon updated their end-user agreement. EFF pulled that that article. They didn't really pull it, they just kind of X'd it out, which is kind of like traditional EFF basically. It's like, hey, we're going to let you still read it, we're going to let you still see what we originally said, we're just going to put a cross out through it and just say it never happened, which is kind of odd. But this is one of the things that Verizon put in their end-user agreement, so in their EULA, it basically says, and you can read it there, it says it's going to include companies like AOL. Yeah, I love my data from Verizon being shared over to AOL. Certainly, let that happen. Okay, so you can look and basically see, hey, they're going to share your data. So, you know, do we have time to read these EULAs? No, absolutely not. But that is some of the stuff you're going to see in there. And that's just one instance of an Android-based PUP. Now, we're not even going to get into the Windows just yet, and I'll get into the Windows and show you some stuff that's really going to probably cause some concern. So, one of the things that happened last year, and I don't know if you all have read on this, but the Ask Partner Network, or the Ask Toolbar, was essentially compromised by this meme. So, how did they do this? So, to give you a couple of really good foundations for this, back in November, Red Canary, a guy there by the name of Joe Moles, if you've ever heard of Joe. Joe posted an article there, and one of the things that he had outlined back in November, that the Ask.com toolbar had been compromised by a malicious actor to execute malicious software on the victim's endpoints. And they outlined exactly how that was done. Well, it was a very good, well-written article, and you can find it out there. It's not very hard to find. But if you're not familiar with Ask, it's basically just nothing more than a search toolbar, right? Sounds exactly like AppFlash. But it was bundled with an Oracle Java installer. So if you were installing Java as of November of last year, you were probably prompted for this particular install right here, which was this executable we're getting ready to talk about. So it was probably in my opinion, because it was bundled with Java, it was probably the most unwanted software suite that was being installed on the internet at that time. Now you would say as an IT professional, you're not, or as a security professional, you're not going to install this software on your own computer. I'm not one to put Java on my own computer, but you know that your help desk staff, and you know that the folks who are building your images that are down in your organization are probably putting this on there. So, very interesting there. So back in December of 2016, Carbon Black and you all know who Carbon Black is, they stopped an attack mechanism from one of their particular customers after the certificate was issued in the November incident identified by Red Canary in November. So they had a customer who had this issue as late as December of 2016. So this was a month after Red Canary got a hold of this that Carbon Black was reporting and seeing this in their own customers' networks. So this was probably about Christmas. I'd get a call, and usually, you know, as a person, you know, you want to help your friends, and there was a particular firm that had called me and said, hey, we have an extreme issue. We have a rash of reverse shells happening in our network. We can see it, we can see the anomaly, we can stop the anomaly, we can keep it from happening, but it's still a persistent threat. We still see the persistence in this. And it seems like every day they're spawning a reverse shell back into our network, and not just like, you know, something where we can just attach ourselves very briefly in the network. We're talking about a full-blown reverse command shell here. So basically full control of a machine in this case. So one of the things I went down and started looking at was, okay, where is this mechanism coming from? So we looked at the firewall, we looked at the exceptions there, we looked at every place you're going to normally look for attack vectors to occur. And I'll just go ahead and say they had all of the vendor level controls that you would want in a network. They had the blinky light box, they had the IT security staff, they had a staff of 4, well, this is probably a company of about, I'd say about 500 employees. And so they had our appropriate IT level staff. They had a number of different investigators that were within that particular firm that were capable of investigating this particular type of persistent threat, but they didn't know where it was coming from. So we looked at all the traditional stuff, we did not find it. Until finally I started digging into the machines that had been compromised, and I found one particular thing that was common among them all. They all had a toolbar installed, and they had all went through a fresh Java install. And I'll get to how this all happened. So, and it wasn't Java that was the threat here. So here's the questions. Okay, number one, let's just go into the Ask toolbar. How did the exploit work? I'm going to break that down and give you a little indicator of how this exploit was able to work and establish a reverse shell in one particular network. Second thing, how did the exploit go undetected for weeks, if not months? I'm going to show you some stuff here that you're still looking at this and saying, why is this still occurring? And the second thing, I'm a forensic guy, okay? I'm not an InfoSec guy. I'm going to look at it from 2 different angles here, and how do we identify these type of threats? How did I identify that these threats were happening in a network? And then from a InfoSec perspective, how do we mitigate and predict or prevent these type of attacks from happening in the future? So here's what happened. So upon the Java install, what was going on was an executable was offloaded as part of that install. It was called apn mcp.exe, just a very standard vanilla install, which was part of the Ask APN, which is Ask Partner Network update process. So what they were doing is they were downloading Java, and then this particular executable just kind of, okay, we'll take that download with it. The process then forwarded itself, so it connected itself to a tbapi.search.ask.com. Okay? So you can pretty much easily look at that and say that it goes out to ask.com, which looks like a legitimate domain, and then it immediately made an outbound connection via, and you pick this up here, via a valid digitally signed file called logo.png or logo.gif. Now, I'm no expert I do know that something entitled logo.gif or logo.png is not a good thing to be downloading unless you're downloading it with HTML content. And you all know that you can package just about anything in those two particular types of files there. I know I have all the time. Those are easy ways to get those particular types of threads across. So what it was doing, after it offloaded that logo.png, it then made another call to another VPN or virtual private server outside of the US that wasn't even associated with the APN environment. You're like, somewhere, somehow, some way, something had to pick that up in the process. And I'm thinking, okay, why didn't the firewall pick it up? Why didn't Symantec pick it up? Why didn't my anti-malware? Why didn't the signed certificate pick it up? Why didn't we have some type of mechanism that picked this up and did something with it? That's what worried me. And I'm thinking, okay, if I don't pay attention to this now, this is going to come back to bite me in the butt a little bit later on, because if this is still happening now, or this happened for over a month, you're seeing some really gnarly malware go out into the wild. You will also see some very unprotected servers out there. If we can compromise the server, and I'm going to just kind of throw it out there, we can probably push this type of attack again, if this were to happen. So just got to go back and complete this out. After it downloaded the logo.png, it went back and ran what we call an APN updater manager.exe. Now you're saying, okay, I can just run the hashes on these and find out what these are. Well, I'm going to talk about why that is really not a good way to do it either. And basically what that did is that just pushed along a remote access Trojan that was signed with an APN LLC code signing certificate, and that was issued back on November 9th of 2016. So I'm going to try to tie all this back together because I'm throwing a lot of information at you. It's kind of like drinking from a water hose. So I'm going to show you and break this down exactly how all this happened. Now, the problem here, and I'm not going to get into what type of the attack vectors, but I will say that that a lot of the put together of this kind of reminded me a lot of the Angler EK. If you guys are familiar with Angler EK, that was kind of out and about in the wild last year. You see a lot of that other stuff. Nuclear EK, if you're familiar with Nuclear. Nuclear and Angler kind of followed the same mechanisms as far as how they pushed themselves out to the network. This was very indicative of that, but it was even more raw than that. It really wasn't that sophisticated. So it just pushed itself across, spawned a command shell, just kind of moved forward from there. Now, so stop for a second here. That malicious process made an outbound HTTP connection to the same host, spawned a reverse command shell process, and then from that shell, the actor potentially could control the host remotely, download additional tools, you name it, they could do pretty much anything within the local network. They could pivot or whatever. As long as I had the reverse shell, I was able to do it. So one of the things I wanted to see is, could I do that back in my lab? Took that same executable, set up a variant of that was close to it, and was able to push it across. So, and you like that graphic? If you were like in the 1990s, it really, maybe like 20% of you guys got that, right? That's sad. That is sad. You know how we're like further and further removed from the 90s, right? It's just I hear the music to my ears there. They can just watch that all day, right? We just keep that up. But no, it's literally, just break it down. So it sounded much better in my head. It really did. All this stuff does, right? I was like, when I got up this morning, I was like, okay, I want to start off this speech and talk about how it's great, because I've never been to Missouri before, okay? And I remember how many times I died in Missouri as a child playing the Oregon Trail, and how many times I was buried around here. I mean, probably a good, 2 or 3 dozen times, right? That I died right here in Independence. I didn't even make it out of Kansas City to get into the state of Kansas and start working towards Oregon. I died right there, so there's tombstones everywhere, technically. So it sounded much better in my head, right? So, oh wow. It's that after lunch, right? Should have done this before lunch. Everyone's like looking at me like, oh gosh, it's going time. No, I still have a couple of minutes. So let's break this. So let's look at that executable. That executable was considered to be a PE file, meaning that Windows, because it was from the Ask Partner Network, flagged that particular file as a PE file. That's why I set the stage to tell you what a PE file was. Because sometimes we identify PE files as just being the standard system files that Windows puts on, like the DLL files, right? That's what I always thought it was. But technically, Windows can identify just about basically anything that they want to as a PE file. And they did just that. So you had one that slipped through the radar, identified itself as a PE file, and then moved forward. That malicious process then made that outbound HTTP connection to the same host and then spawned that reverse command shell. What do you see there? What's the problem with that? You want to take a guess at that? Do you see it? Pretty much gave it away. That is being noticed as a PE file, which is not good. And this is pretty much like every faculty at our university have an IQ of 180, but yet your entire IQ is crypto locked in your dissertation. So it's really, it's one of those things. If you remember seeing A Beautiful Mind of Russell Crowe, he's looking at all those numbers and he's trying to figure out what the code was, but he can't crack it. So he goes crazy, and then he cracks the code, but he's crazy. And because he's cracked the code, he's figured out the code, he's decoded the message from the Russians, and then you find out by the end of the movie that he's crazy and it meant no sense whatsoever, but we still got a Nobel Prize for something that was totally unrelated to what half the movie was on. Now that I've royally confused you, now we can move on. And I just kind of threw that. This one right here is just thrown in there just because. So I teach at university, so this is true to me. These two slides right here sums up academic careers right here. Because I mean, you think about it. I hope nobody from where I teach is watching this. It's sort of like. But it's a truth. I mean, we fire things, we move things. Do we think this is, a lot of the threats that we're dealing with is probably some noob firing up Armitage and then hitting the Hail Mary button, and then you're having to mitigate that threat, not knowing where that threat came from and exactly what the mindset of the offender was. So it's really kind of a tough environment there. So that was a freebie right there, by the way. So the second question here that you want to answer is, how did that exploit go undetected? That's where I want to get into. Now, these binaries that we're talking about have extensions other than the executable. We know them as DLLs. But the endpoint vectors attribute the legit PE apps by answering these three questions. Number one, was it digitally signed? Okay? Did the binary that was written go through a signing and a digital sign mechanism? Now, what I mean by digitally signed is that, did it go through an entity that just kind of gave it the Vatican blessing that it is a legit file? Now, in this case, we'll identify that. The second question that most endpoint vendors look at was, are these binaries present in other environments? And that's another question you got to answer. And the third question is, how often are these binaries present in other environments? Now, you see this coming together. This is like a recipe for disaster here. Second question here, was that binary written or executed by a digitally signed entity? Answer? Somebody want to answer that for me? Yes. Who answered that? Yeah, catch that. All right, so there's the first question. Was it signed? Was it valid? Yes. Did it have a signer authority? Yes. It was signed by Symantec. When was it signed? It was signed on November 9th. Okay? Remember the timeline of this. Red Canary, and I'll go back a couple of slides to go back to the Red Canary article. Gosh, this is going to be bad. When did they identify that? The 5th of November of 2016. When was the certificate signed? 6th. The 9th of November of 2016. 4 days after an article was posted saying that they had been compromised. Doesn't take a person with half a brain there can look at that and say, there's probably something wrong with that. Because if you look at traditional signing authorities, this will usually be weeks. This will be something that will go back maybe a couple of months. There's an anomaly there when you're looking at something that has been signed recently. Sometimes you'll run across it, but sometimes you won't. But executables are executables, and they'll be signed for a good while before they become re-signed again. So if you go back and you look at files that have been signed by a certificate authority, just take a glance at the valid from and to, because that's a good way to determine maybe I'm not dealing with a legit file here. Second questions, are these binaries present in other environments? Yes, they are, because people still install Java. And you can see right there, look at that. Oh, we recommend installing that free browser add-on from Ask. That's an easy way to push your malware across. This is probably the most popular add-on PUP install that I've ever seen. Now, gosh, back in the mid-90s, this was everywhere. But this is still around. This is one that I just pulled down probably about 3 weeks ago. So I literally pulled down the Java install, started the install, got to this screen, took a screenshot, posted it. Still there. So you betcha. How about frequency? Look at your add-ons in Firefox. See if it's there. Yes, it's still there. What about these toolbars in IE? Oh, there it is. There's another toolbar. And there's another add-on from Ask, which was the last screen that I gave you. Same executable file pushed off in 3 different mechanisms. So whether you're using Firefox, IE, or Chrome, you could still potentially pick this up. So it's really hard to kind of get this to kind of move across. Third question here. How do we identify these type of threats? Well, I pretty much gave you one of those, which was, let's look and see when that certificate was signed. In this case, it was signed a little too close for comfort. Okay, so if you're not examining your certificate signings, or if you have files that have been digitally signed, start to take a look at them by hand at some point, because you may see that anomaly pop up. In this case, easily started looking at those digitally signed files, found out that it had been signed November 9th, 2016, started looking up some interesting stuff on the internet, and found, not going to match. Now, here's a shot just basically pulling the same executable file into a hex editor. That's super secret stuff, I know. Taking the file, opening up into a hex editor, and just looking at the hex level stuff. We make it too complicated sometimes. And what do you see there?
45, 76, 221, 212.
Yeah, that doesn't look right, okay? So now you have an IP address, and right after the IP address, what do we have? You want a t-shirt? Take a t-shirt. Let's try to get the t-shirt again. There's that logo.gif, or GIF, depending on what side of the fight you're on. It's there. Now, what is that IP called to? Well, that IP is, if you start looking that up, it's probably going to call a nothing now, but you see that it calls out to a logo.gif. Right there at sector 0, it starts. I don't have to dig at 550 bytes in. I don't have to dig 3,000 bytes in to find this. I don't have to do any type of base 64 encoding to figure out that it's in there. I didn't have to pull these from the memory registers. I opened the executable in a hex editor. Simply. Now, here's the one that worries me the most. So, after deconstructing the executable file, pulled this into VirusTotal, and you can see when the analysis date was done. Somebody help me out there and see when that analysis date was done.
March 2017.
No, that's today.
I got up this morning and did this. So you can tell that I put this is fresh. This is fresh as the meat market down the road. Well, maybe, I don't know, but it's probably already outdated. But anyway, most of your detection ratios were 13 to 61. So 13 to 61 identified this, we're good to go. 13 of 61. Now, fortunately, I'm not going to go through the list, but you guys can pull this up as well. Now, there is a SHA-256 hash of this, and of course you have hashes, but you can see that it identifies as a PUP. And a lot of your major antivirus vendors do. But which one of those? Do you have one of the 13 that's of that 61? I don't know. Maybe you want to go back and look up. Now, why was this persistent in the network? So one of the things I found, 13 of 61 is still not good. Now remember, this originally came out in November. November! We're in May. 13 out of 61. Still a problem. Big problem. Fourth question you want to answer there is, how do we stop and mitigate these types of threats and attacks in the future? Well, my not so nice answer is just to say, don't allow any third-party non-essential extensions and plugins. The firm that I went to and did this, they were doing what we call open source intelligence gathering, OSINT. Everyone does OSINT now, right? And it's, well, they'll call it OSINT. So basically they had set interns back to set and do OSINT intelligence on everything that they were doing investigations on. So one of the easy ways they did that is they tell their interns, okay, install this toolbar, and do this, and this. And they were including that as part of their standard image. So what they had done is they had pulled down this AST toolbar and they had put it in a centralized location, probably back in July, and whenever a new intern would start, guess what they did? They installed all of those essential plugins that they needed as part of their image. This thing was persistent. It didn't have the chance to update itself. You saw this in China a couple of years ago. I don't know if you guys remember this, when the Apple developers, when they were sharing that one particular file that was malware laced. Do you guys remember that? And they just kept passing it around, and all of these machines in China became infected. And it came down to because they weren't downloading the newest version of their Apple developer software from Apple directly, because Apple had replaced that malware-laden file, so they were just sharing this around because of poor internet connection. This was the same thing that I ran into. They had all of these files pre-downloaded in a centralized location. They were just going back and using those files over and over and over again on the install. So if you didn't find the file, and you didn't find the file that was causing the problem, this would have been a persistent threat even up until today, because it would just been happening over and over and over again until maybe their antivirus vendor had caught up with it and then scrubbed it out for them. But it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. None of those payloads at the time, back in November 9th, were detected by endpoint engines. None. If you ran that back on November 9th, when the attackers were literally getting reverse command shells, they were running these and unfettered access, to the point that they basically had full-blown PowerShell. 0 out of 62 at that time, the virus total was picking up that was a threat because of that digitally signed certificate. The thing is, though, with the examination of the PE binary files, the plugins and extensions alone is really not sufficient to detect any type of new or novel attack. And that's just one prime example of that doing that. One of the things you have to do is look at the behaviors of those files to those specific applications in order to get that to work. And that's one of the things that I really harp on, because avoid that whole, okay, it's not harming me today, it's not a problem. If you're really doing this idea of threat hunting, start reading up on this stuff, because if you went out and read that Red Canary article back on November 5th, this would have never been a problem to that particular firm. If they had kept up with these legitimate threats that are coming out there, it would have never happened, at least to them. But one of the things that you've got to get yourself out of this mentality, and this is what I tell students back at the university all the time, be an active practitioner, and when you get information, please share it somehow, some way. Whether it be at a BSides conference or whatever, because the more information we can put out there, the more we can mitigate these types of threats. This stuff really did not drop fully to the full-blown public until probably about March, when Carbon Black dropped their stuff, and Brian Baskin, if you guys have heard of Brian Baskin, he has some ties back to Marshall, a good friend of ours. He was part of that article that came out that I flashed earlier that had a lot of this stuff in it. So putting that stuff out there and seeing those anomalies is a really important part of this. Here's one tip here. Not every fish is caught with a hook. That's what we look at. And we sometimes fail to realize that, at least I do. Sometimes we think that it has something to do with, you know, we're going to send that as an email attachment, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and then this is going to happen. WannaCry gave us a really good example of we don't have to have a hook in order to get a fish to work, right? There was nothing that was put in place, and a lot of people say, oh, we patched it, we fixed it. And I'm thinking in my gut, I'm like, no, we did not patch that yet. If you look at that, 4 out of 5 patches that worked on that original, and that drop of those NSA tools was not good enough. To me, I'm looking at that still and saying 13 out of 62 is not good enough for me. It makes me feel a little uneasy. What am I going to say it happens? Unfortunately, here's what I think is going to happen. Is that we're not going to pay attention to this enough, and you're going to see a lot of those shadow broker tools that are out there that are going to be reconfigured, and it's a matter of time if the vendors do not fix their sites that are offloading these PE executables to us, that it's going to be a matter of time until they pick this up, compromise this again, and now we have a full-blown version of Ask.com Part 2 out in the wild, and we're dealing with this again. Now, what do we do about it? Well, we look for these anomalies, we catch them before it ever happens, because that's what happened this time. If we didn't have folks that put those articles out there that caught that and sharing this stuff at conferences, we never have that. So, good to go? So, got just a couple of things there, and probably wrapping up a couple of minutes early just so we can field some questions. But there's my contact info. If you're ever wanting to help out, and I give you kind of a quick and dirty thing about this. One of the things that I push in my profession, there's a disconnect from academia and people that are practicing. We are putting out graduates, and I'm just going to say it like it is, that you guys know it, they're not ready to work the job just yet. They're not. And one of the things that I really try to push is to try to get these folks trained and ready to go so they know what they're doing. But we can't do that unless we have help from you guys. So if you're working with a local university, great. Go back to your alma maters, help them out. Help them out with their programs. Speak. If you're interested in speaking at part of our program, Skype in. I'll put you in contact with folks. You can come in and give speeches. We do that all the time via Skype. Students love it. Get involved with the whole community in general. I know a lot of you guys, this is your first BSides conference, but you kind of forget what it's like to be in college again. So get in contact with me, add me on Twitter, add our program on Twitter, visit our website, shoot me an email, whatever you need. I'll be glad to help you out. Now, last thing I want is questions. You guys have any questions? Back there.
Do we know how they were to get their executable signed by Symantec? They impersonate Ask and choose Symantec, or do they actually compromise Ask email and get it sent out?
They compromised Ask.
Okay.
They compromised the Ask server. So they basically compromised the Ask server. That's a really good question, by the way, because I just want to mention that, but it's like drinking from a fire hose and you're trying to remember all this. But what they had done is they had compromised the Ask server and then pushed that executable from the Ask.com server. Now, what would have stopped this? Ask should have secured the servers. Plain and simple. And that's a scary thing, because Ask is a really big network, and they still are. They just didn't have their server hardened down there. So, any other questions? Comments? Anything?
Snake bite or dysentery?
Nice.
Dysentery, probably 9 out of 10 times. It got me every time.
Me too.
There's probably, I was telling a girlfriend the other day, I don't know how many pounds of meat we threw out there to spoilage. You know, you shoot 900,000 pounds of buffalo, and you probably have to drop it by the time you got here in Lawrence. So, I think it would be a good presentation for next year, wouldn't it? You know, it's InfoSec according to the Oregon Trail, because this is the beginning of the Oregon Trail. You guys realize that? You all guys started in independence. You were the beginning of the Oregon Trail. You should be proud of that. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, you just get started in this business, we need to know, so that tools will help us understand some of these things. Maybe I want to get involved.
Yeah, so, yeah, like open source, he mentions a really good question here. If you're just getting started in this, and as far as like open source tools and stuff like that is concerned, one of the things that students really falter on is they're overwhelmed by the amount of tools that we throw at them initially. You know, and I hate to say this, but we teach them Armitage initially, just because it simplifies and dumbifies the hacking process. And then we move them into Metasploit and some of the other toolkits that are out there. Then we move them away from Kali and take that away from them and make them install their own tools, which is really, really bad. So, but it gets that way. And I want you to say this, you know, or want to kind of, because I have like 5 minutes left here, so I was a little bit short. But if you want to help out in that regard, one of the things that really would help out is getting involved in CCDC tournaments, especially at the regional and national levels. I don't know if you're familiar with CCDC, but go look it up. A lot of you folks are already involved with CCDC. If you have your alma mater, your college that isn't involved with it, go back and beg them to do it. Because we do it every year. We have a blast. We suck at it. We don't do very good and get past regionals most years, but we learn a lot in the process. Work with the red teams, work with the blue teams, get involved with that, because that bridges that whole academic industry gap that I see happening. I'm really, really pushing to do this. This is out of my comfort zone to come in and give a presentation, because, you know, you want to go to an academic conference and, you know, go give that and, you know, talk about the word hacking, and they're like, ooh, yeah. And then you get up here with you guys that are practicing professionals in this, talk about this stuff and say, man, you know, you get out here and share this, but this is the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to be sharing this, and we're supposed to be doing this together. So I ramble on all day about this. Questions?
So they were talking about automation a lot over the course of the day.
Yeah.
Do you have a suggestion on how, like, pretend you've got, you know, a fair number of tools deployed out in your own enterprise? Do you have a suggestion on how you would automate the discovery of these types of entries into a network? Because to me, that we'd be looking at that, and these are things I would have to manually come across. I would have to completely rely on my own mentality to go, wait, periodically I'm going to go check these things out. Well,
if you go back and you look at the virus total scans, and if you get a hold of this PowerPoint, go back and look at the virus total scans, because the hash values are a little bit deceiving. You could run the hash values and say, oh yeah, identified this file, but if if that file hash has changed the slightest bit, it's going to still fly under the radar. I'm going to give you the answer that I would give if I were doing it, but it's not technically the right answer. I would look at rule writing, and I would learn PowerShell, because those are two ways that you can automate that whole process. I know there's a crap ton of tools out there to do it, but gosh, I wouldn't want, I'm hesitant to say, okay, just set up a snort rule for that, because my gut's telling me that that's not the correct answer. So I'm a forensic guy, so you're asking the completely wrong person the wrong question. But that's a good observation there. Automating this and catching that in an automated way, because you're basically just don't install Java. But if you think about it, if you automate this whole process here, you can automate this from start to finish, because if you know that this is going to be a concern and you know that's in the network, you can automate that and say, okay, that user shouldn't have that executable even on their machine. So as soon as you could write a rule set that says, okay, no. Basically, that's what you could say. And there's some things you can do in PowerShell, but I don't know off the top of my head. So it's a good question.
Does that give me a t-shirt?
Yeah.
Oh, I said, does that give me a t-shirt?
Yeah.
Awesome.
You might have any more questions? I'm going to get rid of these t-shirts.
So, I love the shirt too, but obviously you've been doing the research on this. Have you found like a bad PUPs website or a good resource for these more recent notable ones that you need to watch out for?
No.
Obviously it's malware and different things, but
If the red canary and the carbon black are the only two articles that I found on this, that anyone talks about this. This is what scares me about this, because this came out about the time that the election hack was happening, and then when the stuff dropped in March, it wasn't the Friday. I was telling Dallas about this earlier. Dallas was in there. Me and him were talking about this. And what had happened was that Friday when Carbon Black dropped their article, then the shadow brokers dropped their tools that same Friday, and we're like, oh, squirrel. We totally got away from it. If this would have happened any other time, we would have caught this, it would have been shared throughout the complete community, and we would have been done with it. This is what scares me. This has flown under the radar of the security community badly. And I'll say this right now, and you may say this, Professor was right, you know, he did say this was going to happen. Hopefully this doesn't happen. When it does, you can say, oh, yeah, he's right.
How long was asked pushing that before they realized that they were compromised?
They won't come out and say, but there's indicators that said this was happening since July, August, October, November, 5 months. 5 months. This is not like a couple of weeks, guys. This is months, and now we're still looking at the same thing. And now I'm done. My timer ran out. Thank you, guys.